The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com.
Hello, and welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge in New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and we're going to be jumping into one of my favorite topics to discuss, lodge culture. First, though, you can jump in and join Craftsman Online at craftsmanonline.com. We've partnered with Arizona State University to promote their amazing America 250 themed course for this summer. We're calling it summer school, but they're calling it what the founders meant by pursuing happiness. You can learn all about what the motivations were from some of our famous founding fathers who also just happen to be Freemasons. This is a course that is open to anyone who has an interest in American history, and it's definitely something cool to do with the kids throughout the summer. Moms and dads, for educators, go ahead and add this to your lesson plans for school in September. Trust me, it is one of the most engaging history courses you can find online, and you can get started at craftsmanonline.com. The question that a lot of us traveling men ask when we're visiting lodges is, why do some lodges tend to have this energy while others are kind of just fading? Is it the members? Is it the events that they do? Maybe their legacy or traditions? Or is it something much deeper? That's the theme that we're going to be exploring on this episode as we dive in with Worshipful Brother Scott Dayton and Right Worshipful Brother Bull Garlington from Lux Lunae Lodge number 1181 out of the Grand Lodge of Illinois.
It was something that I said in a work meeting, and it stuck, where I said, our competitors can steal everything about us, including our people, but they could never steal our culture. I never really thought that that would apply to a Masonic Lodge or Freemasonry just in general. But the more I've heard about Lux Lunae, the more I want to visit this lodge.
Thanks. I think it's the culture, man. I really do. And it is a culture that was deliberately and declaratively designed and executed.
Yeah, it's intention. That's what it is we knew exactly what kind of culture we wanted, and we made sure that that's how we structured everything to point towards that kind of culture.
So give me the history of this lodge. Was it recently started? Did you find a struggling lodge and new guys came in and affiliated and slowly started making what they wanted? What was the thought process here?
I'll take that one because I'm a founding member in Lux. So about 10 years ago, I'll tell my story. About 11 years ago, I was kind of burned out on Masonry. It wasn't everything I thought it was going to be. I was doing a lot of things, but I didn't really find it fulfilling. And it got to the point where I wasn't kind of even enjoying it anymore. So I told my wife, I'm quitting everything for a year. And at the end of the year, I'll come back to the things I missed. And in the midst of that year, some guys reached out to me that I know, and they said, hey, we're having a meeting to talk about starting a new lodge in Chicago. You want to sit in and see if it's something that's interesting to you. So I went to this meeting with about a dozen guys. I knew maybe 3 of them, and we all had that same experience of not being really fulfilled, or some guys described it as the fraternity isn't what I thought it was when I joined, or I didn't have the experience I thought I was going to get. We spent 6-9 months talking about what kind of lodge would we want to join. We've had this shared experience, and I actually put a label on it later, and I called it, we all wanted to stop doing Freemasonry and start being Freemasons. In terms of, how is this a framework, Freemasonry? We becoming a better man, a better father, a better husband, better son, a better person. How do we subdue our passions and improve ourselves in Masonry as a practice? And that's how the lodge started. That was kind of the founding conversation about how it got going.
Even though I'm not a founding member, I was circulating with all these guys because so many of them were people that I was already having conversations with. Because, like Scott said, there was a bunch of guys who weren't happy with their lodge. But there's another side of that mindset, and that is most of these guys are deeply erudite. They're readers, they're thinkers, they are autodidactic. They're constantly trying to learn, constantly trying to broaden their understanding, not just of Freemasonry, but of all kinds of other subjects of philosophy and of literature and of art. They were already doing that. And each one of us would run into another one and go, oh, wow, it's so good to meet you. And we realized there was this sort of small like network of guys that all were in that same headspace. So it wasn't only the fact that we weren't having a great Masonic experience. Part of that great Masonic experience is we weren't seeing that kind of attention to the things we were interested in lodges.
And I want to tack one more comment on there because I don't want to sound judgy about this. There's nothing wrong with the Freemasonry I described. It just wasn't for me. And there's a lot of guys that enjoy that and find fulfillment in it. And I think that's wonderful. It's a big fraternity. There's a lot of space for a lot of different things. I just wasn't finding what I needed in the fraternity at that time.
Totally agree with you. I think we all get to that certain place. You have your mother lodge. That's where all the magic happens. The first 2 degrees, you become a master mason. That is your first step into Freemasonry. And if you don't travel outside of that lodge, even in your jurisdiction or district or wherever, you think every Masonic experience is just like that building. And once you step outside and go across the street or across the town, you're like, oh, wow, this was totally different. The guys are different. The lodge room looks different. The vibe is different. Hey, the culture is different. What they eat or when they eat their meals, completely different. Programs, everything, right? And I think the longer that you're in this as a Freemason, one of the things you start doing is you start picking up other lodges that you either visit or you start affiliating to fill these gaps that you're talking about. And something that's really special is to find a lodge of brothers that say, hey, we're going to do the opposite. Instead of guys leaving here, we're going to figure out what we want and start building the house and the family that we want to have here and start making Masonry that we want to do again. I would say it's making Masonry fun again. Can you walk us through that process of the kind of the transformation from what Lux Lunae was to how you got to where you are now?
We started the way we are right now, to be honest with you. I mean, we were very intentional about the culture we were going to build. We didn't have a bunch of guys join an existing lodge and try to transform it. We chartered a new lodge. We didn't remodel an old house. We built a new one.
Where did you find these original guys? And then how did you allow the people that started affiliating to come be a part of the family?
That's a good question because I came in midstream in the conversation. I mean, I wasn't at the genesis moment of this. There were a couple of guys who got together, and I don't want to speak for them, so I can't really tell you how it initially kicked off. I do know that it just gained momentum pretty quickly among a bunch of Masons on the north side of Chicago.
Well, how did you find these guys and what attracted you to them?
Well, like I said, there's a couple of the guys that I was already having conversations with, and they weren't members of the lodge of my mother lodge. My mother lodge was a very typical Masonic lodge. I liked it because I still like it because they have a real sense of humor. And, when you talk about lodge culture, you also talk about lodge personality. And we have 7 lodges in our district, and each one has a very distinct personality. The one that I started out with, Kelvin Park Willing, there's a joviality there. There's a lot of ball busting. They are actually a lot of fun. But the membership dwindled pretty quickly. But anyway, the thing that I kept meeting up with other Masons from other lodges, not just in our district, but around other districts for whatever reason. And these conversations began to emerge with these other guys. And I would find out, oh my God, he reads the same books I do. Or this guy would say, hey, come over here and let's talk about this bourbon that we love. And we seem to have similar interests, but the one that was core among everybody was this abiding attention to philosophy in its various forms, not just, stale sort of academic philosophy, but active philosophy. Just actually, how do you actually live your life properly? How do you live your life richly and fully? We were questioning those things. And I found that to be something that united us. So I ran into a guy named Ray. Ray introduced me to another guy. Then I introduced them to another friend of mine. And then I found out through somebody that they were planning this new lodge. And I just went right to the source. And I said, hey, what's going on? I went in. And so that's the way it happened. Then they told me what the dues were. And I said, I'll see you later. I was like, I'm a writer. Okay, I'm not going to pay that. But I did.
Well, you're talking about this. I'm thinking of lodges that I've visited where I'm like, oh, this lodge is cool because they all smoke cigars afterwards, or they wear fancy smashy tuxedos with the tails or they wear gloves, or they are really good at ritual, or they have amazing dinners, or whatever the reason is. They're all musicians. They all went to the same college. We're starting to talk about affinity style lodges. Very rarely do you say, hey, this lodge is cool because all these guys seem like different versions or variations of the same guy, which is kind of odd because you don't find that in a lot of lodges. And that's what I'd like to learn more about. Like, how did you go through the selection process of like guarding your West Gate?
That's, you want to go, Bull?
I want to add something to what we were just talking about right before this, and that is that when you're talking about the lodge culture, and I was kind of talking about philosophy and everything, the thing that really stands out is since I've joined this lodge, and this maybe before that when I was just meeting a lot of these guys, there has been a conversation that has been pretty much uninterrupted since that time. It's the best conversation I've ever had. And that's the thing that drew me in. That's the thing I believe connected all of us, is that when we got together, we would sit down and talk, and suddenly it's 2 a.m. It's that kind of rich, deep, rewarding conversation that never goes away. And when you ask, how do you protect that? I know the phrase is always, how do you guard the West Gate? We don't really have to, because that conversation and the culture in our lodge is so important to me. It's such an intrinsic part of who I am and of my life daily that I cherish it to such a degree that I wouldn't even dream of inviting somebody into that if there was even the shadow of a doubt that they would disrupt that vibe. My threshold for bringing somebody actually into our lodge is absolutely the highest it's ever been, because I want that vibe to stay solid.
Talking about how do we protect the lodge, or the lodge culture, and why is it so important, and why do we strive so hard to preserve it. Let me describe that culture a little bit before we go on, so that we know what we're talking about here. We're all using this statement. We understand how we're using this word and what it means to us. We declaratively wanted a lodge that had a couple of characteristics. Feel free; it's an unlimited list, so we'll feel free to jump in. We wanted members that were intellectually curious. We wanted a small community that was focused on philosophical inquiry. And what I mean by that phrase is, how do I become a better person? How is Masonry a framework that's going to help me become a better man and lead a more fulfilling life? So,
how do I understand this thing in my life that I don't understand?
Yeah. That's the one that jumped up to me. That's different. Most people would describe a successful lodge as like, we have 100 members. We have so many guys. But you're, by design, you want to purposely keep this small and special.
Well, that's because there's an intimacy here. Like, we're a group of guys that isn't practicing Freemasonry in our lives just on lodge nights. We're trying to apply this as kind of a virtue-based framework for leading my life. And how am I doing that? And where am I doing well? And where am I struggling? And how much value, which is enormous, do I get from being in a room full of guys that are asking the same questions, even if their answers are different? Just the fact they're asking the same questions, there's so much value there.
You spend enough time around Bull, and you'll find yourself either sounding like him or saying things like him. And in my case, we had a brother that was not attending, and it was kind of newly raised. And I said, dude, when you were excited, like, think back to how excited you were to join our lodge. That's how excited we were to have you here. This isn't a transactional thing. This is a two-way street thing. So we need you here for this experience, right? But for you guys, it's not just something you say to encourage someone to be a part of the lodge. Like, these are kind of the non-negotiables that when you say you don't have to have the discussion about guarding the West Gate, because you really don't. If it's not going to be a good fit for that guy, he's either going to say, hey, this isn't really what I was looking for, or I'm sure you have a gentle way of saying, hey, there's somewhere else that might be a better fit for you than here at Lux Lunae.
Absolutely. That happens a lot. More than the other way around. Self-select out. We've had many candidates self-select out because as you're mentoring them and prepping them, and kind of explaining to them what this fraternity is rather than maybe what they thought it was, some guys can make that transition into that, and some guys are like, I'm not getting the national treasure secret, so I'm out. And
Right.
again, like some guys self-select out. Some we've had to have a conversation of like, we very rarely, but we have had it. Like, we don't think this fraternity is for you. And then often, or more often, uh, is the conversation of, hey, we think you'd be a great Mason. We'd love to have you as a brother. But there's another lodge in the district that I think is a better cultural fit based on what you tell us you're looking to get out of your experience as a Mason.
And it's never like my experience is they've never taken it as like, really crap. I think they're always having the same feeling, and they're usually relieved. They're like, oh, well, good. And then we take them to that lodge, and just their personality fits right in. And we've done the fraternity a service. We've done that person a service. We've done our lodge a service. That's the way it always should be. You should take a guy around and visit a couple of lodges. You might go to a lodge and suddenly you see that guy light up with the people in there. That's where he belongs. Put him there. Don't be greedy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Speed dating, and yes, if it doesn't work out, we can still be friends. Like, honestly, that's...
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, our process also takes a long time. Or I should say our process takes as long as is necessary for us to gain a true and deep understanding of the person that we're admitting. And they don't, their journey doesn't actually begin officially until we all sort of organically start talking to each other and saying, hey, I think it's time for John Doe to take his degree. I think it's time. And somebody else will go, yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. You're right. It's time. And then we explain why we feel that way. And then it happens. And because you talk about the things, I talk about the things I treasure in this lodge. This experience is a thing that I treasure above all others. And that is that particular moment that we all know about in the first degree, that moment of revelation. In our lodge, it is almost, I want to say explosively emotional, but it's not. Explosively is really the wrong word, but it's powerful like that, except that it's such an inward thing, and it's such a reflective thing, and it's such an aspect of being stirring, for that person. And the emotion, like Scott said earlier, when we say it goes both ways, in that moment, it also goes both ways. It's like there's rays of light from every member going in and shining back from that guy. It's an extraordinary experience because we know that guy and we love that guy and he loves us. And then everything starts. That's a mind-blowing moment.
So I don't think there's a listener right now who, if you're not a Mason, who's sitting here going, oh, I wouldn't want any part of this in my lodge. Like, I think that, yeah, I would want that. And we've talked about some of the steps, the goals, the dedication, the intent that you had when you set out for this, the discipline that you've had to kind of stay with it. I have seen, whether it's a master of a lodge or a handful of brothers of a lodge who have tried to exert some influence and be like, ooh, I want to change how we practice Masonry we're going to start wearing these outfits, or we're going to make these rules. What have you done, or what has the brothers of Lux Lunae done to kind of evolve over time? Have there been changes where you're like, hey, as a lodge, you know what? We want to try this. We want to take on this new hill.
I'd like to answer that if I could. We meet naked. It really makes everything transparent. It really kind of lays everything on the table or on the edge of the seat.
Does keep it small and intimate. What have been some natural evolutions or changes or things that you're like, hey, as a lodge, we want to try this. Let's try this flavor. We've never done this before. Let's do this. Has there been new things?
The way we've, paired off candidates with a mentor has evolved over time and gotten richer and better and more informed. The way we do education has changed significantly. And it's kind of evolved to where we are now, where it's, we're giving probably a 15-minute presentation, and then there's, a North Star question that drives a 30 to 45-minute conversation.
Or longer,
which really,
that's just when we cut it off.
Yeah, that's what increases the bonds and the intimacy of this lodge, and getting to know each other is that kind of. I use the word intimacy, but I don't mean that, and vulnerability. I'll throw that out too, but not in a, we're not group therapy, man. Freemasonry is not intended to be group therapy. We are intended, I believe, and our lodge definitely is intended for a place where a man can come in and have a conversation with guys who are asking the same questions about, what does it mean to be a good man? What's it mean to be a good father and a good husband? Because that changes culturally over time. The kind of husband my dad was is different from the husband my grandfather was, and you can't take those and apply them now. Culture's constantly changing, and how do I be that father and husband and son and friend that I want to be based on these values that I say I'm embracing in Freemason?
We had an incident recently that I think illustrates that really well, and it was with a person who was basically a knocker, a petitioner. They'd had come to several meetings. We were becoming friends, and the conversations were getting deeper and deeper. They sort of, it was after a meeting, we're all grouped up in the room, and the guy said, I'm having a lot of trouble with my daughter. She's 12. And he said some things that resonated with some of us, and immediately, and he was struggling, you could tell, and immediately 15 guys, 20 guys all just sort of sat down and goes, okay, here's what we think. And we had a long, real conversation with this guy. It wasn't all like, unicorns and rainbows. Some of us were very challenging. Like, I listen to your language and I see what I think is maybe a little bit of a problem right there. And I think maybe you should consider a different point of view, and in the end, the guy was just like, that's like 8 years of learning in a half an hour. The purpose of a lodge is to be that group of friends, to be your crew. When you go to your crew, you should be able to belly up to a bar with those guys and say, hey, man, I got to talk to you guys about this thing. And your crew's response is always and necessarily bring it. And there's that support, that immediate ride or die kind of support. Now, afterwards, your balls will be bruised. but in the moment, that's the whole point of this fraternity. That's literally the most, to me, one of the most important things of this fraternity is the support that we give to each other. Now I want to go talk about the third degree, and it's
Well, here's what I found special about this is that I asked you guys a question about innovations or changes or updates or modernizations or whatever you want to say to what the initial plan was. And it was like, and to you it was, well, we made this small change in lodge education, or we tried this out differently with mentors. It wasn't anything that was a huge gravity change. It was a little tweak, a little thing here and there, where I have seen guys as master try to come in and say, hey, I'm going to try to I started to try to put traditions into my lodge. I'll just use me as an example of, hey, I want to open the lodge this way, or I want to do business this way. We're going to do agendas this way. And then to see how quickly when the next guy gets in, none of that sticks. When the next guy after that comes in, still nothing sticks. It's like, okay, well, that was that year. And if culture is a key part, a pillar part of the success of a lodge, then I'm interested to see how the leadership of your lodge operates. Where do you truly act as brothers who are all on the same level?
I'm going to say unequivocally yes.
Absolutely.
And I want to make two real points here that are salient to what you just brought up. To sustain a culture over time, and I've been a corporate executive for a long time, man. And you get these waves where it's like, man, the culture's great, the organization's healthy, and they don't last a long time. It's hard to build a culture. It's hard to build a declarative culture, and it is infinitely harder to sustain it.
You have to build fortitude into it, oddly enough.
Yes. So the question I hear behind your question, Michael, is how does an organization, how does a lodge, how does Lux in particular, balance preservation with adaptation? How are we going to sustain this over time? How do we sustain Lux Lunae Lodge's culture beyond the generation of founders? That's the question. How do we transition leadership of the lodge from the founders to post-founding generation?
looking for guys that have a similar focus, like-minded, philosophical, the intent to stay small. There are other special things that you do that make Lux Lunae amazing to me. One of them I'd like to talk about is you rotate the degrees that you open every month throughout the trestle board, not based on if you have a candidate who is a first degree or second degree or third degree, but you go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's a simple tactic that any lodge could start doing. Why do you do it, and how has it been effective?
We do it for a couple of reasons. The most important one, I think, is that we've always got candidates in the pipeline at various points in their work, right? So, if we have an entered apprentice who's working on preparing himself for the second degree, he can come to a meeting if we're opening on the first. It keeps them engaged. It's not, you got that first degree, you got that second degree, but because we're always opening on the third, you're not allowed in the lodge room until you get raised.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps them engaged, and it keeps them ratcheting up incremental engagement, right? Because, hey, I'm a first degree. I get to come to a couple of meetings. Hey, now I'm a fellow craft, and I get to come to more meetings, and I get to hear more stuff, and I get to bond closer with these guys until finally, now I'm a master mason. I can come to all the meetings and be fully engaged.
I've seen this a lot in my lodge in DC and my lodge in New York. Both suffer from this. Is that, hey, we've got an EA, so we're going to, until he's a fellow craft, we are going to open on the first degree for every meeting so he can be in the lodge room. And now I have an idea to challenge that, because I think there's a distinction when you're allowed to be there because we know it's on the schedule. And the nights that you cannot be in the lodge room doesn't mean you can't be in the lodge. You can be off studying and being engaged in Masonic education. You could be downstairs helping out in the kitchen or getting dinner ready, because Lord knows you need to learn how to do that too. But you can now understand that there's other functions that you can do besides being in there. But it also makes that moment, kind of to what you're saying, Scott, is when you are in the meeting, special.
Right. And every lodge is different. I'm not going to tell anybody their culture or processes are right or wrong, but I can tell you our experience at Lux is, a little bit, and I'll use a corporate phrase, but rank has its privileges, right? So, you want a little bit of a carrot of like, hey, well, if every meeting's opening on the first, until I get my second degree, then I'm fully engaged and I'm allowed to participate in everything. Maybe you shouldn't be allowed to participate in everything.
That brings up two things with me. And one is that let's not forget that a lot of the new guys, especially the ones that come to our lodge, they're looking for the full Masonic experience. And what they're talking about when they say that, or what they're thinking about, is the traditional experience. And so when it comes to, particular rules, like you can't have an EA in a second degree, I think they appreciate that. I think that's part of the friction, the good part of the friction for them is to do that. The second thing is, man, so many lodges have this drop off after their guys get their third degree in 2-3 months. The guy just never shows up, and they don't. I've preached this and preached this and preached this. I'm going to preach it again right now. We understand that the guys right now and the generations the generations that are coming into our fraternity right now want to earn it. They don't want it handed to them. Everyone talks about how this generation gets participation ribbons. We gave them those ribbons. They didn't ask for them. The guys that are coming to Masonry are the kind of guys that are buy it for life guys. They're looking for analog stuff. They are savvy. They value their time and they value their headspace enormously. They don't want anything handed to them. They want to earn it. Scott calls it a carrot. It's also an achievement. And these guys want to achieve that. They want to earn it. When they get their degree, they want to feel like they earned that.
Yeah, they don't want it to be easier. They want it to mean something.
Make it harder.
From the outside, somebody might be listening to this podcast episode and going, well, that's great. These guys have the perfect lodge. They've got it all great. And we all know as Masons, perfections is really just an illusion. Are there problems that are facing your lodge right now? If so, what's one that we can talk about?
Yeah, there is. I covered it a little bit, but let's talk about it more in depth, and that was their, and this came up over breakfast. I was having breakfast with a couple of the brethren, 2 founders and 2 guys that we raised. And one of the guys brought up, our experiences of Freemasonry is Lux. You guys all came from other places. And sometimes we don't kind of get the jokes or the warnings or the, kind of what's going on. And And it really hit home with me because I think it was an unconscious bias that I was certainly participating in. And it really got me to thinking at a very deep level, how do we get in front of that and make sure it doesn't adversely impact our culture, which really led to a longer term, feeding into our long-term strategy of how are we transitioning leadership from the founding generation to the post-founders. Because I've sat in lodges where, you've had this happen 1,000 times in my own year as master. You get the old guys on the sideline. That's not how I did it in my year. How do we avoid that? That's not helpful. It certainly doesn't help the cohesion of a culture. So, that's a problem that we've gotten in front of and that we're candidly talking about, and that's been addressed and we have a plan for. That's everybody's bought into. This is how we're going to transition from founders to post-founders.
And I think it means that when we bring people in, we need to have maybe a little bit more proactive attention to the history of our lodge and to, the relationship our lodge has to other lodges and to the district in total. I think maybe it's something we have to do. I still think that we should take our guys around to other lodges. And there should be a tour. And I feel like it should happen before they even petition. I think we should say, well, let's go. Let me introduce you to Chicago Freemasonry as it is. There's 7 lodges. Why don't we go visit a couple of them? If a guy goes to a lodge that meets at the temple down in Jeff Park, it depends on what night he goes, depending on which lodge he runs into. But he can keep going to the same building different days of the week and meet different people. And so there's a little bit of an ease right there for those guys. And I think we need to build that in because who knows, if a guy comes into our lodge and he's really just fantastic and we like, this is the guy. And then we take him to this other lodge. I know I said this about people where we were saying, hey, maybe we don't think you're a fit for this, but we should also do it before we make that decision as a courtesy and as a discipline. Because if a guy turns out that he falls in love with this other lodge instantaneously with the guys in this lodge, who are we to stand in the way of that?
Totally agree.
Man, what a great episode. Thanks again to my guests this week, Worshipful Brothers Scott Dayton and Bull Garlington. If you enjoyed this discussion, we're going to get basically a whole nother episode on Thursday. If you're a Craftsman Online podcast subscriber on Patreon, look for our bonus episode. If not, hey, don't worry about it. Just open up the notes for this episode. Yeah, right there in the show description. Bang, you'll find the link to join us on Patreon. And I'll even kick in a free 7-day trial just so you can get a taste to see if ad-free episodes and access to a lot of our subscriber extra episodes is what you're looking for. I'm Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. During the entire month of July, we'll be highlighting our American history and also Freemasonry's unique point in the beginning of this country. Monday morning special guest is Brother Chris Rulli to talk about his new book, Congress and the Freemasons. Until then, let peace and harmony prevail.